I never thought my woodpile would become the most controversial thing in Cedar Ridge, Colorado. But here we are, standing in my driveway while Patricia Henderson from the HOA board waves a printed copy of community guidelines in my face like it's the Constitution itself. "Mr. Jenkins, this is completely unacceptable," Patricia said, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing at a grainy photo she'd apparently taken from across the street. "You have exactly 14 cords of firewood stacked against your fence. The HOA guidelines clearly state that visible firewood storage is limited to half a cord, and it must be covered with a tarp that matches your home's exterior color palette." I looked at my neatly stacked woodpile, then back at Patricia. The October morning was crisp, and I could already feel winter coming down from the mountains. "Patricia, I sell firewood. This is my business. I've been doing this for 3 years, long before you moved here." "That may be," she sniffed, her blonde highlighted hair barely moving in the breeze thanks to what must have been half a can of hairspray. "But I'm the HOA president now, and we're enforcing all regulations. You'll be receiving a formal fine of $500 and an additional $250 for every week the violation continues. You can't be serious." "I'm extremely serious, Mr. Jenkins. This is a premier community, and your little lumber yard is dragging down property values. Several neighbors have complained." I knew that was garbage. The several neighbors were probably just Patricia and maybe her friend Susan, who lived 2 streets over. Everyone else in Cedar Ridge actually appreciated having a local firewood supplier, especially when November rolled around and the temperatures started dropping below freezing. Colorado winters weren't a joke, and neither was heating a home at 8,000 feet elevation. "I'll see you at the next board meeting," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is unreasonable, and you know it." Patricia smiled that tight little smile that people who enjoy petty power always seem to have. "The fine notice will be in your mailbox by this afternoon. Have a blessed day, Derek." She walked away, her sensible heels clicking on my driveway pavement, and I stood there wondering how my peaceful mountain life had suddenly turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. My business, Mountain High Firewood, wasn't some massive operation. I owned 40 acres about 10 miles outside Cedar Ridge, where I sustainably harvested dead and dying trees, split them, seasoned them, and sold them to folks in the community and surrounding areas. I kept my personal supply at home because it was convenient, and because customers often stopped by to pick up orders. I delivered the bigger loads from my property, but having a display stack at home made sense. Made sense to everyone except Patricia Henderson, apparently. That evening, I called my buddy Mike Stevens, who'd been living in Cedar Ridge for 15 years and had served on the HOA board before Patricia's regime began. "She's on a power trip," Mike said over the phone. "Ever since she got elected president last spring, she's been finding violations everywhere. She fined the Thompsons for having a basketball hoop that was supposedly 2 inches too close to the street. She made the Rodriguezes repaint their shutters because the color wasn't on the approved list, even though they'd been that color for a decade." "So what do I do?" I asked, staring at the official HOA notice that had indeed appeared in my mailbox. The language was formal and threatening, full of references to CC and Artiques and enforcement procedures. You could fight it at the board meeting, but honestly, Derek, she's got 3 other board members who basically do whatever she says. Nancy Winters and Tom Crawford always vote with her. The only one who might push back is Jennifer Martinez, but that's 1 vote against 3. So I'm supposed to just pay these fines and move my inventory. Or you could move it all to your 40 acres and make customers drive out there. I thought about that. My property was accessible, but it was a trek, especially in winter. Half my business came from convenience. People could swing by my house in Cedar Ridge, load up half a cord in their truck, and be home in 20 minutes. Forcing them to drive out to the mountains, on roads that could be dicey when it snowed, would kill a significant portion of my sales. But paying escalating fines wasn't an option either. $500 now, plus $250 a week. By January, I'd be tens of thousands in debt to the HOA. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. I showed up early at the community center, a nice building at the entrance to Cedar Ridge that included a gym, meeting rooms, and a small pool that nobody used in winter. About 30 residents were there, which was a decent turnout. Usually these meetings attracted maybe 10 people, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. She was dressed like she was heading to a corporate boardroom, not a neighborhood meeting. Navy blazer, cream blouse, pearls, the whole 9 yards. We went through the usual boring stuff first. Minutes from the last meeting. Treasurer's report. Discussion about repairing the community center's roof. Then we got to new business, and Patricia's expression shifted into what I was starting to recognize as her enforcement face. We need to discuss the increasing problem of residents conducting commercial activities within Cedar Ridge, she began. Our community was designed as a residential area, a peaceful retreat from commercial districts. However, some residents have been using their properties as business locations, creating traffic, noise, and visual blight. Several people glanced at me. I kept my expression neutral. Specifically, we have a situation where one resident is storing massive quantities of firewood and conducting sales from their property. This violates multiple HOA regulations and potentially zoning laws as well. I raised my hand. I'd like to address that. Patricia's lips thinned. The board will hear public comments after our discussion. No, Patricia, I think Derek should get to defend himself now, Jennifer Martinez said. She was younger than the other board members, maybe 40, and worked as a nurse at the hospital in town. She'd always been reasonable in my dealings with her. Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. Fine. Mr. Jenkins, you have 3 minutes. I stood up, my notes in hand, though I barely needed them. I've been running Mountain High Firewood for over 5 years total, 3 of those years while living here in Cedar Ridge. When I bought my home, I specifically asked about home-based businesses, and I was told they were permitted as long as they didn't create a nuisance. I checked with county zoning as well. Everything I'm doing is legal. The firewood is stored neatly and safely. I've never had a complaint about traffic or noise until now. In fact, I've had dozens of people thank me for providing a local source of quality firewood. Do you know what people were doing before? They were driving 40 minutes to Boulder or ordering from companies that charge twice what I do. As for the amount of wood, yes, I keep inventory on hand. That's how a business works. And regarding the claim that it's an eyesore, it's a woodpile. This is Colorado. Half the homes in mountain communities have woodpiles. Your time is up, Patricia said. The issue isn't whether you're running a business. The issue is that you're violating HOA regulations regarding storage and commercial activity. The CC and Articus are clear. I've read the CC and Articus, I countered. They say visible outdoor storage should be minimized and maintained in good condition. My woodpile is maintained. It's stacked properly, it's safe, and it's no different than someone storing a boat or RV, which I see all over this neighborhood. Boats and RVs aren't commercial inventory, Tom Crawford interjected. He was a retired insurance adjuster who seemed to love rules for rules' sake. Neither is my personal firewood supply, I said. What customers purchase is their business. I'm not running a retail storefront. The debate went back and forth for another 20 minutes. A few residents spoke up in my defense, including old Mrs. Patterson, who said I delivered firewood to her at cost when she was short on cash last winter. Others stayed silent, probably not wanting to get on Patricia's bad side. In the end, the board voted. Jennifer Martinez voted to rescind the fine. The other three voted to uphold it and actually increase the weekly penalty to $500 if I didn't comply within 14 days. I left that meeting angry, but also thinking. Patricia had made this personal, and she'd backed me into a corner. But maybe she didn't realize that the corner she'd pushed me into had a door. Over the next few days, I made some calls and did research. I confirmed that my business was properly licensed with Jefferson County. I confirmed that my property was zoned to allow home-based businesses. I confirmed that the HOA's CC and Artiques, while they mentioned storage regulations, were vague enough that my interpretation was just as valid as Patricia's. I also confirmed something else. I supplied firewood to about 60% of Cedar Ridge households. Not all of them regularly, but over the past 3 years, more than half the community had bought from me at least once. Many were regular customers who relied on my firewood as their primary heat source. Cedar Ridge had natural gas lines, but a lot of the homes, especially the older ones, used wood stoves as primary or supplementary heat. With natural gas prices fluctuating and the romantic appeal of a wood fire, plenty of people preferred wood heat. I provided a service and the community needed it. That's when I had my idea. I called my lawyer, Richard Chen, who'd helped me set up my business structure years ago. I explained the situation. "Can they fine me for this?" I asked. "Technically, yes," Richard said. HOAs have broad authority to enforce their rules, but the question is whether their rules are reasonable and whether they're applying them consistently. From what you're telling me, they might be overreaching. What if I just stopped stacking firewood? That would solve the problem. No, I said. What if I stopped selling it, at least locally? What if I removed all the firewood from my property and stopped supplying anyone in Cedar Ridge? There was a pause. You'd be within your rights to do that. You're a private business. You can choose who you sell to. And if people start complaining to the HOA about not having firewood access? Richard laughed. That's not your problem. That's Patricia's problem. I spent the next week executing my plan. I rented additional storage space at my mountain property and moved every piece of firewood from my Cedar Ridge home, every single log. I also sent out an email to my customer list with a carefully worded message. Dear valued customers, due to recent HOA regulations regarding my Cedar Ridge property, I'm no longer able to maintain inventory or conduct sales at that location. Effective immediately, all Mountain High firewood operations will be based exclusively at my mountain property. For local Cedar Ridge residents, I regret to inform you that I'll be suspending deliveries and sales to the neighborhood indefinitely while I focus on other markets. Thank you for your past business. The email went out on a Friday afternoon in mid-November. By Saturday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Derek, what do you mean you're not selling to Cedar Ridge anymore? It was Bill Thompson, a guy who burned through 3 cords every winter in his big lodge-style home. Exactly what the email said, Bill. The HOA made it clear they don't want me running my business here, so I'm respecting that. But where am I supposed to get firewood? You're my supplier. There are other options. Boulder has a few places. Evergreen, too. Might be a bit of a drive and more expensive, but they are out there. This is ridiculous. It's November. We're 2 weeks from Thanksgiving. I sympathized. I really did. Take it up with the HOA, Bill. This was their decision, not mine. The calls kept coming all weekend. I gave everyone the same answer. Polite, regretful, but firm. The HOA didn't want my business operating in Cedar Ridge, so I was complying. By Monday, Patricia Henderson called me directly. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm hearing that you've sent out some kind of mass email telling residents you won't sell to them anymore." "That's correct," I said. "You made it clear that my business operations weren't welcome in Cedar Ridge, so I've ceased all sales to Cedar Ridge residents. The firewood is gone from my property as requested. You should be happy, Patricia. I'm in full compliance now." "That's not what I meant," she sputtered. "You can sell firewood, you just can't store it at your house." "Right, which makes it logistically impossible to service Cedar Ridge customers efficiently. So I've chosen to focus on other markets. I've got customers in Conifer, Bailey, and Pine who are happy to drive out to my property. It's actually working out better for me, business-wise. I don't have people showing up at my house at random hours anymore. You're doing this to be spiteful. I'm doing this to comply with HOA regulations and run my business in a way that makes sense. Have a good day, Patricia." She tried to argue more, but I ended the call. I wasn't being spiteful. Well, maybe a little. But mostly I was being practical. Patricia had made it clear that Cedar Ridge didn't want my business, so I was taking my business elsewhere. The real test came in late November when the first serious cold snap hit. Temperatures dropped into the teens at night, and snow started falling regularly. That's when people realized this wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a real problem. The HOA's next meeting in early December was packed. I showed up, curious to see how things would play out, but I sat in the back and didn't say a word. Patricia tried to maintain control, but residents weren't having it. "We need to talk about the firewood situation," Bill Thompson said, standing up without being called on. "Half this neighborhood is burning through our wood supplies, and our regular supplier isn't selling to us anymore because of HOA harassment." "That's not accurate," Patricia said. "We simply enforced reasonable regulations about storage." "You fined him thousands of dollars and told him he couldn't operate his business here," someone else called out. "I drove to Boulder last week to buy wood. Cost me twice as much and half of it was green, not properly seasoned. Derek's wood was always perfect." "There are multiple firewood suppliers in the area," Nancy Winters said, backing up Patricia. "Not that deliver," Mrs. Patterson said. "I'm 83 years old. I can't drive to Boulder and load firewood. Derek brought it to my door and stacked it for me. What am I supposed to do now?" Jennifer Martinez leaned forward. "Patricia, maybe we should reconsider the fine and the restrictions. If Mr. Jenkins is willing to store the wood more discreetly or maintain it in a certain way, we could work something out." "The regulations are the regulations," Patricia said stiffly. "We can't make exceptions for one resident." "You make exceptions all the time," someone shouted. "Tom Crawford has a boat parked in his driveway year-round. That's not allowed either, according to the CC and Articus." Tom's face turned red. "That's different. That's recreational, not commercial." "It's still storage," Bill countered. "And it's bigger than Derek's woodpile was." The meeting devolved into arguing. Patricia tried to regain order, but she'd lost the room. People were angry, not at me, but at her. By the time the meeting ended, nothing had been resolved except that a lot of residents now saw Patricia Henderson as the villain. I went home, lit a fire in my wood stove using some of the premium oak I'd been saving, and poured myself a whiskey. My phone buzzed with text messages from various neighbors, but I ignored them. I'd said what I needed to say. December continued to get colder. Colorado was having a particularly brutal early winter, with storms rolling through every few days. By mid-December, the temperature wasn't getting above freezing even during the day. The news talked about record low temperatures and predicted a harsh January ahead. That's when the complaints to the HOA really ramped up. I heard through Mike that Patricia was getting dozens of emails and calls daily from residents demanding that she fix the firewood situation. Some people had found alternative suppliers, but they were paying premium prices for inferior wood. Others were burning through their supplies faster than anticipated because of the cold and were starting to panic. The hardware store in town started selling firewood, but they charged outrageous prices and only sold small bundles meant for occasional use, not serious heating. People who depended on wood heat were scrambling. Patricia tried to save face. Through the HOA newsletter, she announced that she'd reached out to several firewood companies to arrange bulk purchasing for the community. None of them were interested. Why would they be? We were talking about a residential neighborhood spread out over several square miles. Delivering to individual homes wasn't profitable unless you had an established route and relationship, like I'd built over 3 years. I, meanwhile, was having a great business season, focusing on surrounding communities, and my mountain property location actually did improve my operations. People willing to drive out to my 40 acres could pick from my full inventory, and I'd started offering tours of my sustainable forestry operation. It was becoming a selling point. I even started booking spring and summer orders from people who wanted to be prepared for next winter. The requests from Cedar Ridge residents continued. I turned them all down, politely but firmly. I appreciate your interest, but I'm not currently serving Cedar Ridge. HOA regulations make it impractical for me to operate there. On December 20th, my doorbell rang at 8 in the evening. I opened it to find Jennifer Martinez standing there, looking exhausted. "Derek, can we talk?" she asked. I invited her in. She declined anything to drink and got straight to the point. "The board is in chaos," Jennifer said. "Patricia is getting hate mail. Someone vandalized her mailbox. Tom Crawford wants to resign. We need to fix this." "I'm not the one who broke it," I said. "I know." And honestly, most of us know Patricia overreached, but pride is keeping her from backing down. She's convinced that if she reverses the decision, she'll look weak and lose her authority. That's not my problem, Jennifer. I know it's not. But Derek, think about the community. People are struggling. Mrs. Patterson called me crying yesterday because she's cold and can't afford the prices other suppliers are charging. The Hendricks family, they've got 3 kids and they heat primarily with wood because their furnace is ancient and expensive to run. They're burning furniture because they've run out of firewood. That got to me. I didn't want people to suffer, especially kids, but I also wasn't going to be pushed around by an HOA board on a power trip. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Sell to Cedar Ridge again, please. We'll rescind the fines. We'll revise the regulations to be more reasonable. I'll personally make sure the board votes it through." "And Patricia," Jennifer sighed. "She'll have to agree to it. I'll work on her, but I need to know you're willing to resume service if we fix this." I thought about it. I wasn't a heartless person. I'd gotten into the firewood business partly because I liked helping people stay warm and comfortable during harsh winters, but I also needed to make sure this wouldn't happen again. "Here's what I need," I said. "Full rescission of all fines. A written amendment to the CC and Articus that specifically allows reasonable commercial firewood storage for licensed businesses, and a public apology from Patricia at the next board meeting." "Derek, that last one might be tough. Then people can keep burning furniture," I said. "I'm not unreasonable, Jennifer, but I'm also not going to come back just to have her pull this again in 6 months. Patricia needs to admit she was wrong publicly or this doesn't work." Jennifer left, promising to work on it. I didn't hold my breath. Patricia Henderson didn't strike me as the apologizing type. Christmas came and went. I spent it with my sister's family in Denver, enjoying the holiday away from the drama. When I got back on December 27th, I had a voicemail from Patricia. "Mr. Jenkins, this is Patricia Henderson. I'd like to discuss a resolution to our previous disagreement. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Her voice was strained, lacking its usual imperious tone. I called her back. "Patricia, I heard you wanted to talk." "Yes. The board has decided to rescind your fines and revise the storage regulations. We'd like you to resume selling to Cedar Ridge residents." And the apology. There was a long pause. "I'm calling you right now, aren't I? I think that shows enough." "No, Patricia. Jennifer told you what I need." Public apology at the next board meeting. Admission that the fines were unreasonable and that your enforcement overstepped. Or no deal. You're being vindictive. I'm being clear about my terms. You have until the January board meeting to decide. That's January 14th, right? Should give you plenty of time to think about it. I hung up before she could respond. Was I being a bit harsh? Maybe. But Patricia needed to understand that actions had consequences and her power trip had hurt people. If she couldn't own that publicly, then she hadn't actually learned anything. The weather forecast for January was brutal. Multiple winter storm warnings, predictions of record snowfall, temperatures expected to stay below zero for extended periods. It was shaping up to be one of those months that old-timers would talk about for years. January arrived with a vengeance. The first week brought 18 inches of snow and temperatures that bottomed out at -12. My phone was ringing constantly with desperate calls from Cedar Ridge residents. I hated turning them down, but I held firm. "The HOA and I are in negotiations," I told everyone. "There's a board meeting on the 14th. Hopefully, we'll have a resolution then." Some people were angry at me, which I expected, but most understood that Patricia had created this situation. The community sentiment had definitely turned against her. I heard through various sources that there was talk of recalling her as HOA president, but those procedures took time. On January 10th, a massive storm system moved in. The news was calling it a once-in-a-decade event. Blizzard conditions, temperatures dropping to -20. Warnings to stay indoors and ensure adequate heating. That's when things got serious. The power went out across large portions of Jefferson County, including Cedar Ridge. The outage lasted 14 hours. Without electricity, people who relied on electric heat or natural gas furnaces with electric ignitions were in trouble. Wood stoves, however, worked just fine, except a lot of people didn't have wood. The fire department had to do wellness checks on several homes where elderly residents were at risk of hypothermia. Emergency shelters were opened, but getting to them during the blizzard was dangerous. The whole situation was becoming a genuine crisis. My phone rang at midnight on January 11th. It was Patricia. "People are in danger," she said without preamble. Her voice was shaking. "We have families with children who are freezing. The power is still out in some areas. I'm asking you, please, can you make emergency deliveries? I'll pay you personally if I have to." I looked out my window at the blizzard still raging. "Patricia, I can't get my truck out in this. Nobody can. The roads aren't even plowed." "Then what do we do?" She sounded close to tears. "You open the community center. It has generators, right? And a fireplace?" "Yes, but we don't have firewood there. We haven't used the fireplace in years." "I have 2 cords of premium oak in my shed," I said. "It's at my property here in Cedar Ridge, my old inventory that I kept for personal use. I'll donate it to the community center for emergency shelter use." "Thank you," Patricia whispered. "Thank you so much." "This doesn't fix what happened," I added. "We still need to resolve this permanently." I know we do." The next morning, when the storm finally broke, I helped transport the firewood from my shed to the community center. About 20 families had taken shelter there overnight, and more came during the day as power outages continued. The fire I built in the big stone fireplace was probably the most important fire I'd ever started. Kids who'd been crying from the cold slowly warmed up. Elderly folks stopped shivering. Coffee got brewed. People started to relax. Patricia was there, helping organize cots and blankets. She looked haggard, like she hadn't slept. When our paths crossed, she stopped me. "Derek, I want you to know that I realize I made a mistake, a serious mistake. I was so focused on rules and regulations that I didn't think about what those rules actually meant for the community." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I'll make a public statement at the board meeting. A real apology, and we'll fix the CC and Articus to make sure this never happens again." I nodded. "Then we have a deal." The January 14th board meeting had the largest turnout I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. Standing room only. People wanted to see how this would resolve. Patricia called the meeting to order, and instead of going through the usual preliminaries, she immediately addressed the elephant in the room. "I need to begin tonight with an apology," Patricia said, her voice clear but humble. "Several months ago, I fined Derek Jenkins for storing firewood at his property. I claimed it violated HOA regulations, and I enforced those regulations rigidly, without considering the broader impact on our community. What I failed to recognize was that Mr. Jenkins wasn't just running a business. He was providing an essential service that many of our residents depend on, especially during winter. When he stopped selling to Cedar Ridge because of my enforcement actions, many people suffered. During the recent cold snap and power outages, that suffering became dangerous. I was wrong. I let my desire to enforce rules override common sense and community welfare. I should have worked with Mr. Jenkins to find a reasonable solution instead of issuing fines and ultimatums. I apologized to him publicly, and I apologized to everyone in Cedar Ridge who was affected by my poor judgment. The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Patricia's face was flushed, but she maintained eye contact with the audience. "The board has voted unanimously to rescind all fines issued to Mr. Jenkins. We're also amending our CC and Articus to specifically allow reasonable commercial firewood storage for properly licensed businesses, with standards that Mr. Jenkins has helped us develop. These amendments will protect both community aesthetics and essential services." Jennifer Martinez spoke next, outlining the new regulations. "Basically, I could keep up to 20 cords on my property as long as it was neatly stacked, away from property lines, and maintained safely." The language also included provisions for other home-based businesses, making the whole thing more fair and consistent. When they opened the floor for comments, several residents thanked Patricia for her apology. A few also thanked me for the emergency firewood donation and for being patient with the resolution process. Bill Thompson proposed a formal motion to commend both Patricia for her integrity in admitting the mistake and me for my community service. It passed unanimously. After the meeting, Patricia approached me. "I meant what I said up there. I'm sorry." "I know you did," I said. "Apology accepted. Will you resume selling to Cedar Ridge? Already planning on it. I'll have inventory back at my place by this weekend. And I'm offering a 20% discount to anyone affected by the shortage through the end of January as my own apology for the inconvenience." She smiled, a genuine smile this time, not that tight bureaucratic expression. "That's generous of you," We're a community, I said. We're supposed to take care of each other. Over the next week, I moved a dozen cords of prime firewood back to my Cedar Ridge property. I'd learned some lessons too, mainly about keeping detailed records and having written agreements, even for small business operations. I also worked with the HOA to develop better communication channels so that issues could be resolved before they escalated. The rest of January continued to be brutally cold, but nobody in Cedar Ridge froze. I delivered firewood to everyone who needed it, including making special trips to Mrs. Patterson and several other elderly residents who I charged cost only. Business was good, relationships were repaired, and the community actually felt stronger for having gone through the conflict and come out the other side. Patricia remained HOA president, but she was different after that. More collaborative, less authoritarian. She started actually listening to residents instead of just enforcing rules. The board became more functional, with real debates and discussions instead of rubber stamping Patricia's decisions. Jennifer Martinez told me privately that the whole experience had been a wake-up call for the entire board. In February, Patricia even helped me organize a community wildfire preparedness workshop, recognizing that my forestry knowledge could benefit Cedar Ridge in other ways. We talked about defensible space, forest management, and sustainable wood harvesting. It was well attended and genuinely useful. Looking back, I never wanted the conflict with the HOA. I just wanted to run my business and live peacefully in a community I'd come to love. But sometimes conflict is necessary to establish boundaries and ensure fairness. Patricia had learned that rules without wisdom are just obstacles. I'd learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean abandoning compassion. By the time spring arrived and the last snows melted, Cedar Ridge had returned to normal, better than normal, actually. The HOA was functioning better. Residents felt more engaged and empowered. And my firewood business was thriving, with a deeper customer base and stronger community relationships than ever before. I kept the email I'd sent back in November, the one announcing I was suspending service to Cedar Ridge. Sometimes I looked at it and remembered that difficult decision. It had felt risky at the time, like I was burning bridges and potentially destroying my business. But it turned out that sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from something to show its true value. The firewood fines had cost Patricia her reputation temporarily. They'd cost the community access to essential heating supplies during a dangerous winter. But they'd also taught everyone, including me, valuable lessons about power, responsibility, and the importance of community over bureaucracy. As I stacked wood in my driveway on a beautiful April morning, preparing for customers who were already planning ahead for next winter, I thought about how much had changed in 6 months. The woodpile that had caused such controversy was back, properly maintained and now officially sanctioned. Patricia drove by, waved and smiled. I waved back. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, standing your ground, and letting natural consequences teach the lessons that lectures never could. Cedar Ridge had learned that essential services matter more than aesthetic rules. Patricia had learned that leadership means admitting mistakes, and I'd learned that my community actually valued what I did enough to fight for it. The firewood business was simple, really. Cut dead trees, split the wood, season it properly, sell it to people who need it. But the HOA situation had taught me that even simple businesses exist within complex communities, and navigating those relationships requires as much skill as swinging an axe. My phone rang. Another order, this one from a new housing development south of Cedar Ridge. Word had spread about my business and my stand against unreasonable regulations. People respected that I'd stuck to my principles while still caring about the community. "Mountain High Firewood, this is Derek," I answered. "Hi, I heard you're the best firewood supplier in the area," a woman's voice said. "I'd like to place an order for next winter." "Absolutely," I said, pulling up my order book. "Let me get your information." As I wrote down the details, I glanced at my woodpile, sturdy and neat against the fence. The same woodpile that had nearly destroyed my business was now a symbol of victory, perseverance, and the power of community accountability. Patricia Henderson had tried to fine me into submission. Instead, she'd learned that you can't regulate away essential services without consequences. The people of Cedar Ridge had frozen through January not because I was vindictive, but because someone needed to teach the HOA that their regulations had real-world impacts on real people's lives. I finished taking the order and hung up, satisfied. Another cord sold, another customer served, another winter of warmth guaranteed. That's what my business was really about. Not profit margins or inventory management, though those mattered. It was about making sure people could stay warm when the Colorado winter came howling down from the mountains. And if an HOA president learned some humility along the way, well, that was just a bonus. The firewood was back, the fines were gone, and Cedar Ridge was a stronger community for having weathered the storm. Sometimes you have to let people face the cold to appreciate the warmth. Patricia Henderson and the HOA had gotten that lesson delivered right to their doorsteps, one frozen January day at a time. Business was good. The community was healthy. And my woodpile stood as a testament to the idea that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to simply stop playing the game until everyone realizes how much they need you. I hadn't sought revenge. I'd simply stepped back and let nature, and January in Colorado, take its course. The mountains around Cedar Ridge still held thousands of standing dead trees, waiting to be harvested sustainably. My 40 acres would provide firewood for decades to come. And now, with the HOA regulations revised and reasonable, I could conduct my business without looking over my shoulder for Patricia Henderson and her camera phone. Life in Cedar Ridge continued, season by season, woodpile by woodpile. The HOA learned to govern with wisdom instead of just rules. Patricia learned to lead with humility. And I learned that standing your ground and letting consequences unfold naturally can be far more effective than any argument or confrontation. The firewood kept selling, the fires kept burning, and the community kept thriving. That's all I'd ever wanted. And in the end, despite the conflict and the cold January nights, that's exactly what everyone got. A functioning community, reasonable regulations, and a reliable source of quality firewood from a business owner who refused to be bullied but never forgot his responsibility to his neighbors. As summer approached and I spent more time at my mountain property, harvesting and preparing wood for the next season, I often reflected on those intense months. The stress, the anger, the satisfaction of watching my plan unfold, and ultimately the relief when everything resolved positively. It had been a wild ride, but it reinforced everything I believed about running a business with integrity and living in a community with purpose. My final delivery of the season was, appropriately enough, to Patricia Henderson. She'd called in March to order a full cord for next winter, wanting to make sure she was prepared early. When I backed my truck into her driveway, she came out with a check already written. "Early bird special," I said, starting to unload the wood. "You're smart to order now." "I learned my lesson about being prepared," Patricia said, and there was real warmth in her voice, in more ways than one. I stacked the wood neatly in her designated area, making sure it was perfect. When I finished, she handed me the check along with a handwritten note. "Thank you for what you did," the note read. "Not just the firewood, but for teaching all of us, especially me, what community really means. Your integrity made this neighborhood better." I folded the note and put it in my pocket. "We're good, Patricia, all of us," she nodded. "We are, and Derek. Thank you for being willing to come back after everything. A lesser person would have held the grudge." "Life's too short for grudges," I said. "Besides, this is my home too. I want it to work for everyone." Driving away from her house, I thought about how strange life could be. 6 months ago, Patricia Henderson had been my nemesis, threatening my livelihood and peace of mind. Now she was a customer and, in an odd way, an ally. The HOA that had tried to find me out of business was now actively supporting it. The firewood business had taught me about trees, about sustainable forestry, about splitting and seasoning and stacking. But the HOA situation had taught me about people, about communities, and about the delicate balance between rules and common sense. Both sets of lessons were valuable. Both made me better at what I did. As I drove back toward my property, passing through downtown Cedar Ridge with its small shops and friendly faces, I felt genuinely grateful. Grateful for the business that sustained me, for the community that supported me, and even for the conflict that had tested me. All of it had shaped who I was and where I was going. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, but the community at their base was alive and dynamic, constantly learning and growing. I was part of that growth now, my woodpile a symbol of resilience and the power of strategic patience. Some fights you win with force. Others you win by simply stepping aside and letting reality be the teacher. Patricia Henderson and the Cedar Ridge HOA had learned that lesson the hard way during the coldest January in recent memory. But they had learned, and that made all the difference. I pulled into my driveway, where a new customer was waiting to pick up an order. Business as usual, which was exactly how I liked it. The drama was over, the lessons were learned, and the firewood business was back to being what it should be. A simple service connecting people who cut wood with people who need it. The HOA had fined me for stockpiling firewood, so I stopped selling it and let them freeze all January. Not out of spite, but out of principle. And in the end, principle had won. The fines were rescinded, the rules were changed, and the community was better for it. As I helped the customer load oak logs into his truck, I smiled. Sometimes the smallest businesses teach the biggest lessons. And sometimes a simple woodpile can change an entire community for the better. That was my story, my battle, and my victory. Not over the HOA, but over the assumption that rules matter more than people. Cedar Ridge was home, and home was finally functioning the way it should. With fairness, with respect, and with a reliable supply of quality firewood from Mountain High Firewood. Patricia had learned. The community had learned. And I'd learned that standing firm on your principles, even when it's difficult, eventually leads to outcomes that benefit everyone. The woodpile was back where it belonged, and so was the peace. That was all anyone could ask for.